snap.
It's been almost 2 weeks since the token shop dropped, and everyone has been asking, what are the best pool 3 cards to buy with my tokens? So I'm going to go over a list of what I think are the best cards, what are the must-haves, what you should consider filling out your decks with, and hopefully this will help you be able to make those decisions with your tokens a little bit easier. So let's get into it. The first card up that I think is a must-have is Aero. It has just such a strong ability. You can pull cards away from 2 lanes if you think that you're winning those 2 lanes and there's enough space for all the cards. You'll just end up winning. Same with Leader. So Leader is the next card in here. Leader does the same sort of thing as Aero in that if you're winning 2 lanes already, or your Leader is a little bit different where if you're losing by under 4, you can play this card in the lane that you're losing by and then copy the rest of their cards that they play out as long as you have space again. So both of these cards are just really strong in the meta, and they both get you wins with 8 cubes a lot because they're not always expected. So these two are must-haves, I think, and they should be the first cards that you're looking for in the token shop, and that way you'll be able to climb to infinite quite easily, I think, with these 2 cards. The third card in the must-have category is Sera, but I think Sera is technically a little bit less slottable into other decks where Sera kind of creates its own archetype. So it is very strong of a card, but not necessarily the strength of Aero and Leader in the slot ability. And moving into cards that I think you should highly consider, but not necessarily must-haves, Magneto, I think, is a card that is just all around really solid. It is 12 power, and in this meta, we just had Silver Surfer drop, which is around 3 cost units, which Magneto pulls 3 cost units. So you can really swing that last turn by moving some of the 3 cost units that they might not expect. You can also pull Wongs out of position. It's just a really strong card in general. Even if you're not pulling anything, 12 power is one of the biggest cards you can have as a 6-drop. Speaking of big cards, the next card is Destroyer on that list, but Destroyer and Sera and a couple of these other cards did get slight nerfs. This list, it hasn't been updated for those numbers, so just looking at that, just know that. But it is 15 power, really big card. I think the next one I wanted to really call out was Maximus. Maximus is not something that you would necessarily think is just a really meaningful card, but it is just a lot of power for 3. So it does have the downside of drawing 2 cards to your opponent, but that actually matters a lot less than you would think in a lot of games. And if you play it on the last turn, it doesn't matter at all. If they have a Cosmo out, you can play it into that. If there's a lane that doesn't allow on reveals, also play it onto that. It sneaks in a lot of power a lot of times. If you play in the Dark Dimension, it won't reveal till the end. If you play it in Kiln, it's a big card that fits in there really nicely, so that when it closes on 4, you already have more power than your opponent. And speaking of Kiln, Dr. Doom has a really easy time of getting in to Kiln and surprising your opponent. So, and it also spreads out power across a lot of lanes. So if your opponent have waved and you can only play 1 card, Dr. Doom really can surprise the opponent by putting power in each of the lanes. And speaking of wave, we have wave, which really enables a lot of different deck archetypes, playing out big power earlier on, but also limiting your opponent's last turn. And it does this crazy combo with a couple cards. In Pool 3, there's Death, which when you play out Wave, Death discounts on top of the Wave discount. So everything goes to 4. Every card that you destroyed will be 1 less than 4. So you can play Death out for free many times. But if you can play it out for 2 on turn 6 by having at least 2 cards destroyed, it means you can play out Death and another card after you waved. So that means that you're playing 2 and your opponent is usually only playing 1, which really wins a lot of games. So this is in one of the best decks in the game. So Death and Wave are in my should highly consider buying just because they are in such a strong archetype. But Death specifically doesn't go into too many other archetypes other than this Wave archetype. So I'm not going to go over every single card, but we're going to just keep highlighting some of the main ones. Next up, we have Thor. Thor, I think, is a little bit stronger than a lot of people notice right now. You can play him in a lot of decks that are really popular. He actually goes in decks that don't even build around Thor's ability, like a Lockjaw deck or a 3-cost deck with Silver Surfer. You can just put him into a lot of decks and he just outputs a lot of power. 3 power for 10 is a lot. I do know that it does basically deny you 1 card drop, but it is generally worth it to get that 10 raw power from a 3-cost unit. Next up, we have Dracula, which can output crazy power numbers on the final turn for only 4 energy. So this can discard up to an Infinite or even a Giant Apocalypse. It actually triggers the Apocalypse effect before giving it power, so it works really well with Apocalypse. But just really good all around. You can make a whole deck archetype basically around Dracula. This card is probably one of the stronger 4-drops in the game that you can have in your deck if you've built around it a bit. But also, its end of the turn effect means that it is not Shang-Chi-able, so you can't have someone kill it before the final turn with Shang-Chi, which is great. And then just quickly going down the list, not necessarily highlighting anything. Everything in the should highly consider buying, I think, is worth consider picking up if you see it in your shop. Everything down in these good to buy to fill out sections, I think you should look at if you are 1 or 2 cards away from completing a deck that uses these cards. It might be useful to pick these up. And then going down to the page to fill out, these ones are more niche, I think, that have very specific deck archetypes. There is like a 0 Venom Red Skull deck that is actually pretty popular right now with Shuri. But a lot of times, if you're looking at this list right now, you probably don't have many Series 5 cards that would be able to slot these cards into it. So I would definitely recommend looking carefully at these cards when you see them in your shop, and maybe seeing only if it is like the last possible card and you're really interested in that archetype. But generally, it's not going to be the best to try and build around these cards. These cards are a little bit more niche, I would say, and not as powerful as some other ones. Like, there are definitely some powerful cards in here when comboed well or in deck. So Rescue, I used to have a lot higher. It is one of the higher power 4 cost cards, but it typically struggles a bit in the current meta with a lot of Shang-Chi's out there. And there are sometimes just better combos that you can put out there. And then going down to the below average, where I don't think any of these are worth buying with tokens. They are sometimes okay in the right deck, but I would say a lot of them are replaceable, other than maybe like Hazmat in a Hazmat specific deck. But I think Hazmat right now in the meta is only good if you've picked up Luke Cage. So don't bother with it unless you have Luke Cage, I think, from Series 4, which is going to be a little bit harder to pick up. And lastly, down in our ignore completely section, these cards are pretty much unplayable in their current state. There are a few decks that use these in very niche situations, but I would say that those decks are like D tier decks mostly. So really be careful when you see these cards. I would definitely not recommend spending tokens on them. They are probably up for buffs soon. So maybe if they do get buffed, you could see yourself spending tokens on these. But that rounds it out. Thanks everyone for watching. Tell me what you think in the comments. Do you think I maybe misplaced some of the cards? I know some people definitely have like some preferences to some cards that I dislike. Something like Viper, I think, is very weak. It can be used in combination with some different disruption decks, but I do think that those disruption decks with Viper are typically worse than they would be if you include a different card other than Viper many times. So like those kind of opinions, I get them, but we're going to disagree a little bit on some of those things. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Make sure you are doing all the things, like the video, subscribe to my channel if you like this kind of content. I'll be making some more videos coming up. Thanks everybody. See you next time.